Welcome to Responsible AI, the podcast for the AI Forum. Here on the podcast, we engage in critical dialogue with legal minds and tech experts on AI's legal and societal impacts. We talk to professionals in cybersecurity, law, and technology, offering deep dives into public policy and best practices. Responsible AI is hosted by Alex Albin, director of the AI Forum, and me, your producer, Rebecca Staffel. You can learn more at our website, theaiforum.org. We're talking today with Merrill Brown. Merrill is co-founder of the Online News Association and a journalist, educator, business executive, and consultant. He recently served as editorial director of Geo Media, overseeing 11 publications, including The Onion, Jezebel, and Gizmodo. Earlier in his career, he was a newspaper reporter at The Washington Post, and he's been present at the creation of a number of institutions we take for granted, including MSNBC and Court TV, and has been a pioneer in online news. All of that, and he served as a board member or board chair of more than 20 for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. Thanks for joining us, Merrill. It is an honor and a pleasure to have this chance to speak with you.
Rebecca, great to be joining you. Look forward to the conversation.
Let's just jump right in. Let's chat about the future of journalism. No big deal, just right into the future of journalism, particularly as it relates to technology. What do you tell young people who are seeking to enter this field today?
I tell them a few things. I tell them, number one, to make sure they enter the field with multiple skills. When I was starting out, for example, writing was good enough. Not to minimize writing, but you could be a good writer and not know how to record an interview, not know how to shoot, not know how to do all the many things that journalists need to do today. So first thing is do your best to at least get familiar with multiple skills. The second thing I tell them is be thoughtful about being an entrepreneur and not assume that you're going to go to work for a large media institution that's going to care for you and where you'll work for 20 years and build up your clips and your pension and everything else, because that's not the world we live in for the most part these days. If you're lucky enough to wind up at a big successful place like the New York Times, that's one scenario, but more likely you'll be entrepreneurial whether you're in a small organization or launching your own Substack or podcast or whatever the entrepreneurial venture is. So have lots of skills and be thinking entrepreneurially, whether you're going to actually be one or not.
Is there a bigger way to encompass what journalism means now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Rebecca, because journalism means these days a level of engagement that is vastly different from when I started and others started, even as recently as a dozen years ago. You need to be involved with your public in ways that I was never in my beginning days, where, we used to joke about occasionally getting a letter in the U.S. mail from a reader in crayon. And those were in many ways few and far between. You published your story, and that was sort of the end of it. Well, in many ways, these days, it's the beginning of it because there's follow up and there's comments and there's social sharing and there's direct engagement between writers and editors and their audiences in a way that there never was in the days of print and broadcast being the only distribution mediums. So yes, it's much different and the process is different. The story gathering process and what happens after it's even published, considerably different than it used to be.
I think about there are a lot of almost self-proclaimed journalists online now. And so I think that my immediate reaction is to say, oh, well, you're not a journalist because you're not reporting for some particular outlet. But that's just, I think I'm not right in that. Or I don't know. What's your take?
No, you're not right on that. People should be able to earn your trust regardless of whether they're writing under their own names, a tiny brand you've never heard of, or an established brand. And you can take seriously, I think, more seriously work from the Associated Press or New York Times or Seattle Times or whatever it is without needing to necessarily validate it in the same way you'd validate somebody you've never heard of whose Substack post you're reading. So there is a level of reader engagement and oversight of what the reader consumes that's required now. Because if you go to Substack, just as one example, the number of very qualified people who don't necessarily have conventional journalism resumes. They were academics. They used to work in a given field. They've studied a given field. They've done reporting in it in a variety of different ways is vast. And it's up to us as the reader to make judgments about the veracity and quality of their work.
Thank you. And so glad you brought up Substack. And we are here to talk about technology and AI in particular. AI is a relatively new technology. You have seen a lot of things arrive and move and change in your career. Does this AI moment remind you of the advent of the internet or other technological advances?
It feels in many ways like 1994, 1995 when I started working on internet journalism. At least it does to me because there's so much unknown about this, and everything seems difficult and hard and complicated. And investments that are going to make it work are only starting to be made, and products that are going to maximize the opportunity are only starting to be developed. And that's the way it was in the mid 90s when a number of us were getting engaged in news and other categories, and everything was difficult and uncertain. The idea of publishing daily was a challenge in 1996. Today, we publish second by second, and generally whenever we kind of feel like it. But once a day was like pushing a boulder up a mountain. So AI and its uses are as unknown and as challenging and as difficult as those days when putting something on a web page in and of itself was a challenge.
How should journalists be using AI?
Well, they should be using it to create products, among other things. They should be using it as a means to sort and deal with data they own or have created. They should use it as a reporting tool for sure, unequivocally, and use it often and frequently without equivocation. And by that, I mean use it as a way to find material and points of view and chronologies and all sorts of things, all of which require a certain degree of verification. But so does Google search. So does reading something from a publication you're not familiar with. So when a journalist reads something somewhere else or learns from a piece of material, it has to be either validated or come from a source that is kind of unequivocally carries with it validation. So we should be using it in so many different ways. We should be using it to write headlines. We should be in a faster way than we do today, again, with a level of human oversight and verification. We should be using it to aggregate content, which is one of my favorite uses or use cases of AI. Too many stories stand alone on sites, whether it's a Substack post or a news organization's work, without links to high quality related content. I mean, it's amazing to be saying that almost 30 years after internet content was, on a mass market basis being developed for the first time. It's now 30 years later, and related content on most sites is poor and inadequate. I mean, even I had an experience in the New York Times today where the related content stories, I guess in the Times case at the bottom of the page, provided me with a 10-year-old story that had nothing to do with the state of the topic I was reading about circa 2025, but was not even valuable as history. It was just an old story with some keywords in it that were the same keywords found in the story today. So it's really interesting that even the top websites in the country are using terrible tools and giving readers generally poor or related content that has no utility whatsoever. So there's so many different things we can be doing if we're doing it responsibly.
Well, and I hear you leaning on both content creation and research there.
And tool creation, the creation of tools that can make the journalism easier and simpler and more straightforward and speed the process. I mean, the process, especially in traditional journalism organizations, remains in many ways unchanged. A writer writes a story, an editor edits it, an editor puts a headline on it, an editor shows the writer the headline to make sure it's appropriate, and that's in a relatively sophisticated editorial setting. And that process and how all that works is being already disrupted by AI and will be disrupted further by it. But if we can create new efficiencies and more content using AI, then the process will be very, very much worthwhile.
And I know that you are an early adopter of technology in journalism and you helped birth MSNBC. I would like to hear more. You did a project, you did some work with the Associated Press, and just go in on that. What happened there? How did that evolve?
Well, I saw in around 2009, 2010, a couple of companies making progress with what were not then called LLMs, but were with the basic automation content development tools. One was a company called Automated Insights, headquartered in North Carolina, and I went to visit them kind of on my own because I wanted to learn about it, and I saw what they were doing largely around sports data at the time, creating sports data around college. I think it was just college sports at the time. And the company Automated Insights was well along, and they had some more work to do before they could go fully into a large media company. But I had a relationship to Associated Press, and I put Automated Content and Associated Press together. And in 2010, announced the first real AI deal of its kind between a very large news producer, in this case, between the country's largest news organization, the Associated Press, and Automated Insights, that resulted in AP ultimately creating all of its earnings stories using automated insights technology, and doing a lot of its sports reporting in the same fashion. And more, that's become the case. And I think that's absolutely invaluable stuff. I mean, you don't need a human being to write that Company X had announced quarterly earnings of 37 cents this morning, an increase of 4% over the previous quarter, and the stock rose 17% as a result. You really don't need a human being to do that, as long as the data that's entered is properly entered and comes from legitimate verified sources, credible wire data, and so on and so forth. So that was a big advance. It got a lot of attention. There was a flurry of stories written then about robots writing the news and all the risks that robots were going to take over. And the ecosystem hopefully got that out of its system, and those stories stopped after a while. And people realized the efficiency of this. And in a world of the news industry losing resources, the fact that somebody could write those earnings stories, that was a machine and not a human who could be doing actual reporting, was suddenly seen, and was seen across AP as a benefit and not a risk. So very early on, this is now 15 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be in a position to try to make some of this happen, and to prove a use case that was sort of utterly and unequivocally valid as long as the technology was working.
Has that continued? Are they still using it?
Oh, that has continued in all sorts of ways. The Associated Press did a big local journalism initiative and a bunch of markets, I guess in 2023, and they continue to use it, and look for new and expanding ways to use it. So yes, it's become a model, and other companies like Associated Press have replicated it in one form or another. But they were the ahead of the curve, and Automated Insights went on to a variety of other things, including journalism, and was ultimately sold. Its founder, a guy named Robbie Allen, who's one of the smartest AI people I've ever known, and I are actually talking about a project right now. So things are kind of coming full circle with the same set of problems. Here's this technology. Here's all the talk about it. And if you're a media company, what do you do? Well, we're hoping, Robbie and I, and Robbie certainly, who's opened this company, to begin to help the media industry sort through this in ways that they've been struggling with to date.
What are those struggles? I'm curious about that. I mean, it seems like there are easy things like analysis is hard or you need a human to check over the facts, but what are the other blockers right now?
Well, there's cultural blockers for sure, because there's still a robot writes the news mindset that exists out there, and obviously we got to get past that. Robots are not going to be crawling into congressional hearings and covering them. They're not going to be doing investigative reporting, although their use in mining data is enormously valuable. I mean, that's a thing that's got to get figured out. But there's a old saying in technology, which I know you know, Rebecca, which is garbage in, garbage out. And one of the problems with uses of AI, and I stumbled into this myself, in 2023 when I was involved with a company called Geo Media, is when you take the public web, which is full of trash, and assume that AI somehow cleans up the trash that is the public web and turns it into verified content, is ridiculous. And one of the things I tell media companies is you can't trust the web using AI any more than you can trust the web without it. So one of the things you can do and ought to start playing with is using databases that either you have or you've acquired as a means to understand what the AI tools can do. So use sports data, or use an IMDb like movie database, or use stock market data, all of which is clean, if you will, and all of which can be treated in a variety of interesting editorial ways using AI. Use stuff that is good, rather than the filled with garbage public web.
We have spoken with others about the idea of a small language model rather than a large language model.
Mhm.
That sounds like that's what you're getting at.
Exactly, that's a more sophisticated way to put it, but yes, exactly, a small language model, exactly.
Would you mind telling us another story about what happened in your editorial director role at Geo Media? What happened there?
Well, I mean, I summed it up at a high level already. We were under pressure to show progress, and management insisted that we launch some tools in the public domain that the experts on the sites that I ran, in this case, the one most in question was Gizmodo, a technology site which employs several dozen very smart people about their fields, caught errors immediately that probably, well, not probably, certainly ultimately readers would have caught. But when the editors started raising red flags about content from the public web that was off, that we had been mining for, and this is in the context of listings and rather mundane stuff. It wasn't investigative reporting, but the listings were inaccurate because they used inaccurate data from the web. And we're talking here about things like box office grosses, and the numbers were not ridiculous. I mean, nobody said a movie that grossed $2 million. A movie that grossed $200 million only grossed $2 million. But co-stars were inaccurate, and various, I think, box office data was wrong. And the people working on this stuff, immediately saw what had been in effect asked of them to validate and to use AI material, and it became a cause celeb in the middle of 2023, and I became the face of it, and that's all well and good, and we got to take our slaps from time to time when you're doing journalism that's in the public domain. But it was a painful experience. It was covered on the front page of daily newspapers around the world that Gizmodo, a technology site, had screwed up technology when in fact it was the management that had kind of perpetrated this mistake, and me being at least a face of it was a victim of all this. But anyway, it passed relatively quickly, and everybody calmed down and went about their business. And Gizmodo was ultimately sold by this company that I left at the end of 2023 to a French company, and everything turned out fine, and Gizmodo was a great site. But experiments will have costs from time to time. In this case, it was painfully embarrassing, but ultimately a closed chapter.
What would you do differently?
Well, I would do exactly what I said to you, and that is to not use the public web in an experimental way, and to make sure that if you're mining data and trying to get lists at its baseball scores, you're not using data from Joe's baseball site, but you're using it from MLB.com, which is authoritative and definitive. And the data, at least going into the system, you'll know has 99% accuracy. Again, to the point, garbage in, garbage out. If you take in lousy data, lousy results are going to come out of that data.
And it is just a year and a half later, but in some ways it feels like we've gone through a couple more generations of ways to use that.
Oh, absolutely. And we're now in a world where healthcare organizations are at least comfortable providing their customers with preventative health information using AI developed tools. I mean, nobody's making diagnoses yet based solely on AI, or at least nobody responsible. But the level of hallucinations, which is the term for mistakes, as you of course know, maybe not all our listeners know, but that's the term of art. The level of hallucinations around healthcare data and so forth has gotten people comfortable enough so that preventative information is widely being shared via AI tools, and that's making preventative information available to more people than might have had access to it before. And if all that comes to pass as I just described it, that's a wonderful thing.
And I hear you saying that you're working on a project now, but with I don't know how much you want to spill on that, but maybe more generally, what developments are you looking forward to, especially as it comes to AI and journalism in the next, let's just give that another 18 months.
Well, I'm looking forward to more of what I described, and that is newsroom efficiencies, making sure that tasks that are well fitted to machine learning are taken on by machine learning, as opposed to reporting in the streets, and freeing people to do more reporting, especially in small news organizations where resources are at a premium. So that's one thing that's very much on my mind. What can I do with colleagues to try to create newsroom efficiencies using AI in ways that make sense? So that's thing one. The other thing that is very much on my mind is mining data. And data mining, the term I'm using loosely here, is more important than ever for the following reason. We're living at a moment in time where the federal government is taking access from vital data away from the public. And what's going on in a variety of categories is around things like weather is that new databases to replace federally funded databases historically, which are being eliminated or being cut down because of the ridiculous and insane budget cutting going on in Washington right now and agency elimination going on right now. There's a whole new world of private data that's going to need to replace what we've historically got from the federal government, and using AI to find this data, recreate it, recreate the systems that we as taxpayers have invested billions of dollars in around, weather, environmental health, climate, water, et cetera, is really important. Now we need to marshal both financial resources and AI to replicate some of what the current administration is taking away from the public.
Who's going to lead that charge?
Foundations, NGOs, universities, academics, educated citizens, et cetera, because it's not going to come from the government we once knew and trusted, and hopefully we will again. But at the moment, here we are in the spring of 2025, trying to figure out how the private sector and the nonprofit sector are going to replicate something as large as the federal government, which sounds ridiculous on its face, but is at the moment mandatory.
Here on the podcast, we talk a lot about responsible AI, ethical AI. It sounds like just what you're rolling into. What does responsible AI mean to you?
Well, it means the same thing in journalism that it means in the larger world, and that is making sure that both inputs and outputs are at a level of accuracy that's as high as it can possibly be in ways that serve the public interest. And media used to have a public interest standard that was central to what it became and what it is at its best. And that standard, once enforced by the federal government, no longer has that component of it any longer, and it needs to be enforced by practitioners. So we have a new need for ethics to be forward in all our conversations about media and about AI usage. And we're living in a transitional moment when we created new standards for internet journalism where applications had to go through a variety of tests by journalists and others. And similarly, right now, AI is facing the same kinds of tests, and we need to get that right.
I have other questions sort of deeper on the ethical side. Tell me about your concept of national security and secrecy as it relates to these journalistic ethics. Where does that come in?
Well, all that's being tested again right now at this moment, April 2025. And we're used to a level of transparency in government, which is being revised mightily and horribly by the current administration. I mean, we can't get access already to logs and accurate data around what public officials are doing and who they're meeting with. So all the basics about open government are being challenged and tested right now by an administration that doesn't believe in that same set of standards. So AI can be central to that as a tool to break through closed systems, but at the same time, depending on where things go and as we move towards 2026, can be and will be abused by those who don't believe in open government and open processes and so forth. So couldn't be a more important moment to have this conversation. Hopefully we'll be having debates about open government and the use of AI at Congress and around the country at state governments as well.
What are you watching for?
Well, I'm watching for people to put these issues on the table in ways that they aren't at the moment. I mean, one of the strategies of the administration, and I didn't mean to have us engage in a political conversation here, but it's inevitable in the moment we're living in, is to overwhelm us with stuff. I mean, there's a million things going on. Whatever you want to say about these folks, nobody's done more to disrupt the current world or a new era than these folks have in 10 weeks. And journalism and the public are chasing 100 different issues at the same time, meaning that some things are not getting the attention they deserve. Well, how this government and the National Security Agency, where they're changing leadership whimsically, and their ability to use AI to keep up with you and me and the rest of us as Elon Musk mines IRS data, probably using AI tools, inevitably using AI tools. All that has got to get congressional focus and the focus of the media. And whether it falls through the cracks, which it feels like those kinds of things feel like they will sometimes when you're talking about stock markets losing thousands of points, retirees losing their retirement funds, invasions of places like Greenland, Panama, and Canada. I mean, there's so much challenging stuff to keep one's eyes on. I hope this issue doesn't get lost.
So given all that's happening right now, and I guess I've already asked you, what are you watching for? But I'm going to ask it
But
again. Sort of what are you keeping your eye on?
well, are you asking a question in terms of journalism or the world at large, or either one?
Journalism.
Okay. In terms of journalism, this is really important moment when large organizations need to step up and have a level of focus on what's going on that's maybe unprecedented other than in wartime, because the world is changing at an extraordinary pace in ways that test everybody's sense of imagination. I mean, we really have to stretch our imaginations here. 6 months ago, if I had told you we'd be in a trade war and a political war with Canada, you would have mocked me. If I told you that that the Agency for International Development, a tiny agency in the world of things that was helping with famine and other issues around the world, would be abolished. I mean, on and on about things that stretch the imagination. We need to stretch our imaginations because we may land a naval carrier on Greenland one day soon. And as we sit here in early April 2025, there's probably a plan on the Secretary of Defense desk to do so. I'd be shocked if there wasn't. So we need to stretch our imagination in ways that we're not. And that applies to journalism as well. And we need to, write our $7 a month checks to Substack writers we really like. We need to write our monthly checks to the New York Times or Seattle Times or National Review or Slate or whatever your fancy is to support journalism. We need to encourage foundations and family offices and others to support the right causes, and that includes especially entrepreneurial local journalism, local newspapers having failed all around the country, thousands of them. New local news organizations are cropping up all around the country, again, thousands of them, in order to fill the void, and they need support because they don't have the same business model or revenue streams that daily newspapers used to have. So, we in journalism and in the public space need to be on top of our games because a lot is going on.
I think that is a perfect place for us to pause and reflect. Thank you so much, Merrill Brown. Thanks for joining us on the Responsible AI podcast from the AI Forum. You can subscribe to the Responsible AI podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you like to listen. See what we've been reading about the legal and ethical implications of AI on our website, theaiforum.org.